No judge in this state is going to believe a word you say, Wendy. He said it like a fact, like gravity, like something a room full of lawyers had already voted on and signed. I didn't answer him. I just picked up my coffee cup, took one slow sip, and looked at the window behind his head. That was the moment Derek realized, maybe for the first time in 6 years, that my silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. Before I take you back to where this really started, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your country and your local time in the comments right now. It always means something to know who's out there. Now, let me take you back to the morning it all began. A few hours earlier, I almost didn't get out of bed. That's the truth nobody tells you about hard mornings. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with dramatic music or a sky full of storm clouds. They come quietly, like a Tuesday, like the smell of old coffee, like the sound of your phone buzzing on the nightstand at 6:14 a.m., with a name you haven't saved but still recognized. Derek. I let it go to voicemail. I always did. I lay there for another few minutes, staring at the ceiling of my rental in Cedar Park, Texas, a 2-bedroom place with a leaky faucet in the hall bathroom and a back porch that faced a dry creek bed. Not much, but it was mine. Fully mine, in a way very few things in my life had been for a long time. At 45, I had learned to fold myself small, not out of shame, not out of defeat. Out of habit, mostly, the kind of habit you build over 18 years of showing up in rooms where your job is to listen more than you speak, to watch more than you react, to know exactly when to move and exactly when to stay still. 18 years in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps will do that to a person. It rewires something deep. You stop needing people to understand you. You just need to do the work. My neighbors thought I worked for the federal government. Some kind of legal office, they figured. Paperwork. Regulations. The kind of job you don't ask about at block parties because the answer is always vague and a little dull. I never corrected them. I drove a 2014 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard, wore plain clothes on my days off, and kept my yard neat but not impressive. Donna, my closest friend, the one person on earth who knew everything, used to shake her head and say, "Wendy, you could walk into a room full of generals, and every single one of them would stand up. Why do you let these people think you're nobody?" I always told her the same thing. Peace matters more than recognition. She always told me I was impossible. She wasn't wrong. The legal notice had arrived 11 days earlier. Thick envelope, official return address. The kind of weight that means someone paid a lot of money to make their intentions feel permanent. Derek was filing for primary custody of Lily. Full primary. He wanted her living with him and Cassandra in their 5-bedrooms house in the Westlake Hills neighborhood of Austin. Wanted her enrolled in a new school district. Wanted holidays restructured and summers restructured and the whole shape of her life restructured. And his reasoning, spelled out across 14 pages of very expensive legal language, was simple. I was an absent mother. I read it twice. Then I folded it, put it back in the envelope, and made myself a cup of coffee. Lily was 14. She had her father's jaw and my eyes, dark brown, patient, always watching. She played guitar badly and didn't care. She read 3 books at once and finished none of them. She left her shoes in the middle of every doorway she passed through and apologized for it every single time, like she was genuinely surprised it had happened again. She was the best person I knew, and the clearest proof I had that I had done at least one thing right. I had not been a perfect mother. I knew that. Deployments took time. Court assignments took time. There were school plays I missed, and fevers I didn't know about until after, and one Christmas when I was still in Germany and called 3 hours late because I'd lost track of the time zones. I carried every one of those misses. I still do. But absent? No, not that. I was at every parent-teacher conference I could reach. I drove 4 hours round trip to watch Lily's spring concert 2 years ago, sat in the back row in a flannel shirt, left before Derek could see me and start something in the parking lot. I called every Sunday. I texted her about the books she was reading, even the ones she never finished. I knew the name of her best friend, her worst teacher, the boy in her English class, who she said was annoying but mentioned too often. I was there. Quietly, imperfectly, but there. The morning after the legal notice arrived, I called Donna. She picked up on the first ring. She always did. I told her what was in the envelope. I heard her exhale slowly, the specific exhale of someone doing rapid calculations in their head. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "First hearing is in 3 weeks. Okay, a pause, Wendy. You know what this means. You're going to have to show them." I didn't answer right away. Older Americans understand something that younger people sometimes miss. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from hard work, but from years of holding something heavy and never being allowed to set it down. I had carried my service record like a stone in my coat pocket for 6 years. Not hidden exactly, just private, just mine. The Army had given me a file, 18 years thick. Cases argued across 4 continents. A commendation I didn't frame, a promotion I accepted quietly, 23 court-martial proceedings, 11 war crimes investigations, 1 case in Kandahar in 2019 that I still don't talk about in full, not because it wasn't worth talking about, but because the men it saved deserve their privacy more than I deserve credit. Derek had never once asked about any of it. In 10 years of marriage, he had known I was in JAG. He knew I traveled. He knew I handled legal matters for the military, but the details, the weight of them, the actual shape of what I did day after day, he had never wanted to know. Early on, I tried to share pieces. He would nod and change the subject. After a while, I stopped trying. When I left active duty 3 years ago, I took a position with a federal contractor doing compliance reviews, quieter work, steadier hours, a chance to be home more. I thought it might fix something. It didn't. The marriage had been over for longer than either of us had admitted. The divorce was civil, mostly. We were both too tired for it to be anything else. The custody arrangement had worked, more or less, until it didn't. And now here we were. I got out of bed that morning, showered, put on plain clothes. I drove to Donna's office on the east side of Austin, parked the F-150 on the street, and sat in her conference room drinking bad coffee while she laid out the timeline. At some point, she stopped talking and looked at me. "You're not worried," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm worried about Lily," I said. About the case, I looked at the window. Cedar elm outside, still holding its leaves in the October heat. Derek said no judge would believe me, I said. He said it like it was already settled. Donna waited. He forgot, I said quietly, that I've spent 18 years in rooms where the truth was the only thing that mattered, and I know exactly how to put it on a table. Donna looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. "Okay," she said. "Then let's build the table." Marcus Webb had a handshake like a man who had practiced it, firm, controlled. Just long enough to let you know he was confident, not so long that it became aggressive. The kind of handshake you develop over years of billing $400 an hour and needing clients to feel they'd made the right choice the moment they walked through the door. I shook it once and let go. Donna's office conference room was neutral ground. Both sides had agreed to a preliminary meeting before the first formal hearing, the kind of procedural courtesy that costs nothing and occasionally saves everyone time. I had arrived 7 minutes early. Derek arrived exactly on time, which meant he had probably been in the parking lot for 10 minutes. He looked good. He always looked good. That was one of Derek's genuine talents. He understood presentation the way some people understand music, naturally, without effort. Dark blazer, open collar, the specific kind of casual that takes real money to achieve. He'd put on a little weight since the divorce, but it suited him, made him look settled, established. Cassandra sat one chair behind him and to the right, not at the table, beside it. A deliberate choice, I thought. Close enough to signal solidarity, far enough to seem like she knew her place. She was younger than I'd expected in person, though I don't know why that surprised me. Late 30s, polished. The kind of woman who made everything look effortless and wanted you to notice the effort underneath. She looked at me the way people look at furniture they're considering replacing. I looked back at her the way I look at everything steady. Quiet, taking notes without a pen. Marcus opened a leather portfolio and laid 3 documents on the table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this exact move 1,000 times. He talked for 11 minutes without stopping. I timed it. He outlined Derek's position, the instability of my housing situation, my lack of community roots in the Austin area, my professional history, which he described twice as difficult to verify and largely unavailable for public record. He said it pleasantly. That was the technique. Keep the tone friendly. Let the words do the damage. Tanada made notes. I drank my coffee. When Marcus finally paused, Derek leaned forward slightly. He hadn't looked directly at me since he sat down, which told me everything about where his confidence actually lived. Not in his eyes. In his lawyer's voice, "Wendy," he said, and his tone was the tone of a man being very reasonable. "This doesn't have to be complicated. Lily needs stability. You know that. You've always known that." "She has stability," I said. "A 2-bedroom rental in Cedar Park isn't." "It has a yard," I said. "She has her own room. She has a school she knows and friends she's had since 7th grade. I set my coffee cup down. "Stability isn't square footage, Derek." He blinked. "Just once." Cassandra shifted in her chair and said, almost to herself, "That's a very government employee answer." She said it lightly, like a small joke, like a thing that barely counted as a thing. Donna looked up from her notepad. I didn't react. I had spent years not reacting in rooms with much higher stakes than this one. I had sat across from men who had ordered the deaths of other men and listened to them explain why it wasn't their fault. I had watched defense attorneys try every angle, every pressure point, every carefully worded implication. I had learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone wants a reaction from you is to simply not give it to them. I looked at Cassandra calmly. She looked away first. Marcus cleared his throat and redirected. He was good at redirecting. He turned to a second document and began outlining the witness list. 7 individuals prepared to testify about the pattern of my absences during Lily's childhood. Former neighbors. A teacher from Lily's elementary school. 2 parents from her soccer league years back who remembered I hadn't shown up to certain games. He read the list in the same pleasant tone. People over 60 understand something about patience that takes most people decades to learn. You cannot rush a river. You cannot argue water into flowing uphill. Some things require you to simply wait for the current to shift and trust that it will, because you have watched it shift before in places far harder than a conference room in Austin, Texas. I had my own list. I didn't show it yet. When Marcus finished, he folded his hands and looked at me directly for the first time. A professional assessment. Trying to read what was behind the quiet. "Miss Foster," he said. "Not Mrs., the choice deliberate. I want to be straightforward with you. Your client record in whatever federal capacity you've worked in is not going to carry weight in a family court proceeding. What Judge Holt will care about is documented, verifiable presence in your daughter's daily life. And from what we've been able to determine," he paused just slightly, "your career history is largely classified or otherwise not available for public record. Which means, practically speaking, you have no career record worth presenting." "We've checked," he said it gently. That was the cruelest part. Donna's pen stopped moving. I looked at Marcus Webb for a long moment. I thought about Kandahar. I thought about 31 names on a legal brief that I had memorized because I needed to know every one of them as a person before I stood up and fought for them. I thought about the commendation letter I kept in a manila folder in the back of my filing cabinet at home, not framed, not displayed, just kept, and the 18 years of case files that went with it. I thought about the second folder in my bag, the one I hadn't opened yet. "You've checked," I said. "We have," Marcus said. "Okay," I said, "that was all." Donna looked at me sideways. She knew that tone. She had heard it before, twice, in the years when we served together. It was the tone I used in the moment before I restructured a courtroom. Derek was watching me now. For the first time since he walked in, he was actually watching me. Not performing at me, not positioning around me, but watching. Something in the back of his eyes moved. Not quite worry. Not yet. Cassandra leaned over and murmured something in his ear. He nodded. But his eyes didn't leave mine. The meeting wrapped up 12 minutes later. Pleasantries. Dates confirmed. Marcus shook Donna's hand and mine in sequence and said he looked forward to seeing us in court. In the elevator going down, Donna waited until the doors closed. Then she said quietly, "Wendy, are you going to tell me what's in the second folder?" I watched the floor numbers descend. "Not yet," I said. The Travis County Family Court building smelled like recycled air and old carpet. I had been in courtrooms on 4 continents. I had stood in a converted warehouse in Bagram that served as a military tribunal space, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a translator on my left and a court reporter on my right, arguing a case that would determine whether a man spent the rest of his life in a cell or walked out into the Afghan sun. I had been in formal hearing rooms in Stuttgart and a cramped office in Ramstein that technically counted as a legal proceeding. I had been in the kind of spaces where the weight of what was being decided pressed down on the ceiling and you could feel it. A family court in Austin, Texas should have felt smaller than all of those. It didn't. I arrived 30 minutes early. I do that. Old habit. You never want to be learning the geography of a room when you should be focused on what's happening inside it. I walked the hallway, found the water fountain, the restrooms, the secondary exit, noted where the light came in and where it didn't. Donna met me at the door to the courtroom with 2 cups of coffee and the expression she wore when she was running calculations. "Webb filed an amended witness addition this morning," she said quietly. "Someone from Lily's current school. A counselor." "Which counselor?" "Henderson. You know her?" "I know her. I took the coffee. She's going to say I missed 2 parent check-ins last spring." Donna looked at me. "I was in D.C. for a compliance review," I said. "Both times. I sent emails. I have them," she exhaled. "Okay. Good." We went in. The courtroom was standard issue, wood paneling that had seen better decades, fluorescent overhead softened slightly by tall windows on the east wall, a gallery of maybe 30 seats, half filled with people who belonged to other cases scheduled for the same morning. Judge Patricia Holt's bench was centered, elevated, flanked by the state seal and a flag that needed pressing. Derek was already seated at the opposing table with Marcus Webb. Cassandra sat in the first row of the gallery directly behind them. She had dressed carefully, understated, tasteful, the precise image of a supportive and stable step-parent. I noticed everything. The world keeps moving anyway. That's something people over 60 have usually learned to accept. The coffee shops outside were full. The highway was running slow. Somewhere across town, Lily was in second period, probably ignoring her math worksheet and thinking about a book she hadn't finished. Life does not pause for the moments that feel like they should stop everything. That used to unsettle me when I was younger. Now it steadied me. Judge Holt entered at 9:03. She was 60-something, compact, with reading glasses on a chain and the look of a woman who had heard every possible argument at least 3 times and was waiting for someone to surprise her. She called the proceeding to order without ceremonies and began working through preliminary motions with the efficiency of someone who had 17 more cases behind this one. Marcus opened for Derek's side first. He was good. I'll say that plainly because it's true, and because underestimating people is a habit I've never been able to afford. He framed Derek as the consistent parent, the one who had been physically present for school events, medical appointments, the ordinary, unglamorous architecture of a child's daily life. He used the word present 11 times. I counted. He was deliberate about it, building a picture through repetition, the way a good attorney always does. Derek testified for 40 minutes. He was measured, thoughtful, occasionally emotional, in the carefully calibrated way of someone who has been coached on when to pause and let the feeling land. He talked about Lily's schedule, her friendships, the college prep program he had enrolled her in at her new school, a school she did not yet attend, a change he was proposing, but he presented it as already settled, as already decided, which was a technique I recognized and noted. He talked about me gently. That was smart. He didn't attack, he expressed concern. He said quietly that he worried about the instability of my situation, the uncertainty of my professional life, the difficulty Lily had experienced in recent years, not knowing when I would be available. He looked sad when he said it. Cassandra nodded in the gallery. Donna leaned slightly toward me. "Your witness list is stronger," she murmured. "I know," I said. My turn came in the early afternoon after a lunch recess. Donna walked Judge Holt through my housing stability, 3 years at the same address, consistent lease renewals, documented income. She entered school records showing my attendance at parent-teacher conferences, text message logs, Lily's own written communications from the past 2 years. She was methodical and clear. Marcus cross-examined me for 25 minutes. He was looking for the crack, the place where the composure broke, where the professional distance caved into something that looked like coldness or detachment. He asked about missed events. I answered each one with a date, a reason, and a follow-up communication. He asked about my work travel. I said I was in federal compliance work and had managed my schedule to minimize impact on Lily's routine. He paused at that. "Federal compliance work," he repeated. "Can you be more specific about your professional background?" "It's largely government work," I said. "Some of it falls under confidentiality requirements," he smiled slightly. The smile meant exactly what I thought. "So you're asking Judge Holt to simply take your word for a career that you cannot document or describe in any verifiable way." I looked at him evenly. "I'm asking Judge Holt to evaluate the evidence presented, which I'm confident in." He moved on. But the implication had been placed, clean and deliberate, like a splinter under the skin. It was late in the afternoon session, close to 4 o'clock when the side door opened. In courtrooms, people come and go. Clerks, observers with business in other rooms. The gallery shifts and resettles throughout the day. I had learned not to track every entrance, but something made me look up. He was tall, 70-something, maybe older, with the particular posture of a man who had spent decades in uniform, the kind of posture that doesn't leave even 30 years after the uniform does. Silver-haired, broad through the shoulders, moving with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had walked into rooms that actually mattered and knew the difference. He took a seat in the gallery, 3rd row, to the left. He looked at the proceeding for a moment, orienting himself the way experienced people do, reading the room before reading any individual in it. And then his eyes found me. They stopped, not the casual pause of recognition. Something deeper than that. The specific stillness of a man who has just seen a face connected to a story he has never forgotten. Colonel Raymond Price, retired, 78 years old. The man who had signed my commendation letter and then stood in a hallway in Virginia and told me quietly, before I left active duty, that I was one of the finest JAG officers he had ever known. He looked at me across that courtroom. His jaw was still. His eyes were not. Judge Holt called a brief recess at 4:15, 15 minutes. Long enough for people to stretch, check phones, refill water. The gallery shuffled. Marcus Webb leaned over to Derek and said something low and confident. Derek nodded, the nod of a man who believes the day has gone his way. I stood, rolled my shoulder once, and walked to the window on the east wall. I heard footsteps behind me, measured, unhurried, Lieutenant Colonel Foster. I turned around. Raymond Price was standing 3 feet away, hands clasped behind his back, wearing a plain charcoal blazer over a white shirt. No uniform. But he didn't need one. The bearing was the uniform. "Colonel Price," I said. He looked at me the way he always had, direct, assessing, without judgment. Like a man reading a map he already knows but checking it anyway out of professional habit. "I'm here on another matter," he said. "Estate proceeding. Old friend's family." A pause. "I saw your name on the docket board in the hall." "Small Wurzeled," I said. He almost smiled. "You look the same. You look like a general who retired too early." That got the smile brief, real. "Brigadier." And I didn't retire early. I retired exactly when I should have. He glanced toward the front of the courtroom, then back to me. His voice dropped slightly. What is this? Custody proceeding. A beat of silence. Your daughter? Yes. He looked at the opposing table, at Derek, who was still talking to Marcus, still easy in his chair, at Cassandra in the gallery scrolling her phone. Then back at me, are they giving you trouble? He asked. People over 60 know exactly what that question means when it comes from a man like Raymond Price. It isn't small talk. It isn't sympathy. It is a former brigadier general asking, in the quietest possible way, whether he needs to do something. They think my service record is classified or non-existent, I said. They've built most of their case around the assumption that I can't document who I am or what I've done. Price was quiet for a moment. Do you have your file? He asked. It's in my bag. He nodded once. The nod of a man making a decision, then use it, he said simply, and walked back to his seat. Recess ended. Judge Holt returned. We resumed. Donna had planned to call our first witness at the start of the following morning's session. That was the timeline we had built. Careful, methodical, giving the judge time to sit with the documentation before testimony reinforced it. I leaned over to Donna and said 2 words. She looked at me. Now? She whispered. Now, I said. She read my face for half a second, then turned to her notepad and made a small mark. Donna had known me for 16 years. She didn't argue when I used that tone. She just adjusted. She stood and addressed Judge Holt. Your Honor. At this time, the respondent would like to enter a professional record into evidence and make a brief statement for context. Marcus Webb looked up. Your Honor, we haven't been provided notice of. It's a personnel file, Donna said pleasantly. Standard government documentation. The respondent is simply clarifying the professional background counsel spent considerable time questioning this afternoon. Judge Holt looked at Donna over her reading glasses, then at me, then back to Donna. Proceed. I reached into my bag. The file was a dark green military folder, the kind with the reinforced spine and the classification header stripped, declassified properly when I transitioned out. Thick. Not dramatically thick. Not movie prop thick. Just 18 years thick. The weight of it was specific, the way all real things have a specific weight. I stood, walked to the clerk, and placed it on the evidence table. Then I sat back down and folded my hands. Marcus Webb picked it up, opened it. I watched him read the cover sheet. I watched his expression do the thing expressions do when the information arriving doesn't match the model a person has been operating from. It isn't shock, exactly. It's recalibration. The slight freeze of a mind updating itself. He read for perhaps 45 seconds. Then he set it down. Judge Holt looked at him. Counselor? Marcus cleared his throat. Your Honor, I'd like a moment to review this document in full before. The cover sheet is sufficient for now, Donna said. Your Honor, the respondent is Lieutenant Colonel Wendy Foster, United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, active service 2003 to 2022, 18 years, 23 court-martial proceedings, 11 war crimes investigations across Iraq, Afghanistan, and Germany. 2 commendations, 1 Army Meritorious Service Medal. She paused. The career that opposing counsel described this morning as, and I'm quoting directly, not available for public record and not worth presenting. The courtroom was very quiet. Not the performative quiet of a dramatic moment. The actual quiet of a room in which 30 people have simultaneously stopped having private thoughts and started paying attention. Derek was looking at the folder on the evidence table. His jaw was set. His hands, I noticed, were flat on the table in front of him. The posture of a man pressing down on something. Cassandra had stopped scrolling her phone. Marcus recovered first. He was good. He recentered, recalibrated, found the thread of the counter-argument. Your Honor, with respect, military service history, however distinguished, does not automatically translate to fitness for primary custody. The question before this court is presence and stability, not professional. I know what the question before this court is, Mr. Webb. Judge Holt's voice was even, not unkind. Simply not interested in being told what she already knew. She looked at me directly for the first time since the morning I met her eyes and held them. And then, from the third row of the gallery, Raymond Price stood up. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't call out. He simply stood the way a man stands when he has something to say and has decided to say it, and Judge Holt, who had been in courtrooms long enough to recognize authority when it entered a room uninvited, looked at him. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," he said. His voice was the voice I remembered, measured, carrying, the voice of a man who had given orders in the field and knew how to make words land. "My name is Raymond Price, retired Brigadier General, United States Army. I served as Senior JAG Command Officer for the period covering a significant portion of Lieutenant Colonel Foster's active service." A pause. "I'm here on an unrelated matter, but I'd like, with the court's permission, to speak to what I just heard described." Judge Holt studied him for a moment. "You're not a listed witness," she said. "No, Your Honor, I'm not." His eyes moved briefly to Derek, then back to the bench. "But I was her commanding officer. And I watched that woman prosecute war criminals while the opposing party in this proceeding was signing building permits." The room didn't gasp. Real courtrooms don't gasp. They just go very, very still. Derek's hands came off the table. Marcus Webb's pen stopped moving, and somewhere in the back of my chest, behind 18 years of practiced stillness, something loosened. Just slightly, just enough. But what no one in that room knew yet, not even Donna, was what was inside the second folder. Judge Holt granted Raymond Price permission to speak. She didn't have to. He wasn't a listed witness. He had no standing in the proceeding in any formal sense. But Judge Holt had been on the bench for 19 years, and she had developed, I would learn later from Donna, who knew her clerk, a very specific instinct for when a room was about to be given something it actually needed. She granted permission, noted the deviation from procedure for the record, and asked the clerk to administer an informal oath. Reese stood at the front of the gallery, just inside the bar. He didn't need a podium. He spoke for 14 minutes. I'm going to tell you what he said. Not because I want credit. I spent 18 years not wanting credit, and one afternoon in a courtroom didn't change that. I'm telling you because Lily would eventually hear a recording of those 14 minutes, months later, sitting in Donna's car in a parking garage, and it would be the moment she stopped seeing me as the parent who had left and started understanding what I had actually been doing while I was gone. Price started at the beginning. Not my beginning, the Army's beginning with me. 2003, Fort Lee, Virginia. Brand new JAG officer, 26 years old, assigned to a unit shipping out to Iraq in 90 days. He said he had reviewed my initial performance evaluation personally, which was not standard practice for an officer of his rank, but something in my file had caught his attention. She had annotated a procedural error in a standard operating document, he said. A document that had been in circulation for 11 years without correction. Nobody caught it. She caught it in her first week. He paused. I thought, that one is going to be either very useful or very difficult. She turned out to be both. A ripple moved through the gallery. Not laughter exactly. Recognition. He talked about Iraq. The early years, 2004 and 2005, when JAG officers were navigating legal frameworks that hadn't been written yet for conflicts that didn't fit the old categories. He talked about what it meant to do that work, to sit across from soldiers who had made decisions in situations no training exercise had ever replicated, determine what was lawful and what was not in environments where the line moved daily, and to do it with fairness, with precision, and without losing the thread of what the law was actually for. He said I never lost that thread. Not once in 18 years. Then he talked about Kandahar. He didn't use the case number. He didn't use the defendant's name. There were ongoing legal considerations. Still, that made that unwise. He spoke in the careful, specific language of a man who had lived inside the classification system long enough to know exactly which words were free and which ones weren't. But the shape of it came through, a forward operating base in Kandahar province. A unit of 31 soldiers facing a court-martial proceeding that would, if the original charges held, result in dishonorable discharges and federal imprisonment for actions taken during a night operation that had gone wrong in ways none of them had controlled. The investigation had been initiated by a senior officer, a full colonel, well-connected, with reasons of his own to want the narrative settled quickly, and the blame distributed downward. I had been assigned to the case as prosecuting attorney. What I found, inside the first 72 hours, was that the case had been built backward. The conclusion had been determined before the evidence was gathered. Witnesses had been interviewed in sequence designed to produce a specific story. Documents had been selectively included and others quietly set aside. I know what you're thinking. People over 60 who've watched enough of the world move past them have learned to recognize the pattern. It's old. It's not unique to the military or to government or to any particular institution. Power protects itself. That is not cynicism. It is just weather. The difference is what you do as you're standing in it. I rebuilt the case from the floor up. I re-interviewed every witness. I filed for the full evidence inventory under rules most junior attorneys didn't know existed. I found the 3 documents that had been set aside, not destroyed, just quietly filed where no one was expected to look, and I put them back in. It took 4 months. The full colonel did not appreciate it. He made that clear in ways that were technically within regulation and practically designed to make my life very small. Assignment reviews, transfer recommendations, a performance note worded carefully that questioned my judgment and my ability to remain objective in complex cases. Reese paused here. In 19 years of service, he said, I filed 2 formal objections to personnel actions involving officers under my command. Lieutenant Colonel Foster's case was the second one. Another pause. I won both. The courtroom was still. He talked about the outcome. 31 soldiers. Charges dismissed. Discharges reversed. The colonel. He didn't name him, but the room understood there was a colonel. Reassigned under circumstances that were described in official language as routine and were understood by everyone involved as anything but. He talked about what the case had cost me. She lost her marriage during that assignment, Price said simply. I don't say that to assign blame to anyone in this room. Marriages are complicated, and I'm not in a position to judge the interior of someone else's. I say it because it is a fact, and because this proceeding appears to be treating her absence during certain periods of her daughter's childhood as evidence of neglect. He looked at Judge Holt directly. Lieutenant Colonel Foster was not absent because she didn't care about her family. She was absent because she was fighting for 31 other families, and she won. Donna's pen had stopped moving entirely. Marcus Webb was looking at the table. Derek was looking at his hands. I was looking at the window. The cedar elm outside had lost most of its leaves in the weeks since I'd first sat in Donna's conference room. October into November. The dry creek behind my house would be running a little now, with the recent rain. The world keeps moving anyway. I had not cried in a courtroom since 2007. When I was 29 years old and a soldier I'd spent 6 months defending was finally formally found not guilty, and I had excused myself to the hallway and stood very still against the wall for about 4 minutes before going back in. I did not cry now, but I felt the weight shift. The specific, physical sensation of something you have been carrying for a very long time being acknowledged by another person, not taken from you, just seen. Seen and named. Priest finished. He thanked Judge Holt for the indulgence. He returned to his seat in the 3rd row. The room sat in the kind of silence that follows something true. Judge Holt removed her reading glasses, cleaned them with a small cloth she kept on the bench, and replaced them. We'll recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, she said. Mr. Webb, I expect you'll want time to review the documentation entered into evidence today. Marcus nodded. Once, Miss Foster. Judge Holt looked at me, not unkindly, but with the particular attention of someone recalibrating. We'll hear your witnesses tomorrow. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I gathered my things slowly. Donna was already on her phone, quiet and efficient, adjusting the morning's witness order. Around me, the gallery was standing, moving, the ordinary mechanics of a day ending. Derek passed behind me on his way out. He didn't say anything, but he slowed, just slightly. For just a moment, I didn't turn around. I waited until the room was mostly empty. Then I reached into my bag and looked at the second folder. I hadn't told anyone, not Donna, not Lily, not anyone, what Derek had done with that federal contract. I found it by accident. That matters. I want to be clear about that, because the version of this story that Derek would eventually tell to his lawyer, to his friends, to himself in the particular way people rewrite their own histories when the original is too uncomfortable to live in, would suggest I had been looking for it, that I had been building a case against him for years, quietly, patiently, in the way of someone who plans things. I wasn't. I was packing boxes. It was March, 3 years into our marriage, 18 months before the Kandahar assignment. I was home on a rare stretch of leave, and we had decided together to finally move out of the rental we'd been in since we got married, and into a house Derek had found in a neighborhood east of Austin. Good school district, yard, the kind of place that felt like a declaration. We are building something permanent here, something that intends to last. I had been packing his home office. He was out with Lily, who was 5 at the time, taking her to the pediatric dentist and then for ice cream after. I remember the exact light in that room. Late afternoon, March, coming in low through the west-facing window and turning everything the color of old honey. I was packing files, not reading them, packing them. Lifting folders from the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet and placing them into a banker's box. Because Derek had asked me to pack the office while he was out, and I was trying to be useful in the way you try to be useful when you're home rarely enough, that helpfulness feels like a currency you need to deposit quickly before you leave again. One folder came apart at the spine, papers slid out. I gathered them. I was not trying to read them. But I am a JAG officer. I have spent my professional life being trained to read documents accurately and quickly, and when you pick up a paper and your eyes pass over it, you do not get to choose what your brain retains. What I saw was a federal contract number and a set of figures that didn't match. Derek's construction company had been awarded a small federal subcontract through a larger infrastructure project. A standard arrangement, the kind that happens thousands of times a year across the country, unremarkable in every way. The contract specified materials, quantities, labor allocations, and costs. The invoice attached to it specified different quantities and different costs, not dramatically different. Not the kind of difference that announces itself loudly, the kind of difference that assumes no one is looking closely, that relies on the gap between what is contracted and what is audited. I stood in that room for a long time. The honey-colored light moved across the floor. I put the papers back in the folder. I put the folder in the banker's box. I taped the box shut. I told myself I had misread it. I told myself there was a legitimate explanation. Amended contracts, revised materials orders, accounting adjustments I didn't have the context to understand. I told myself Derek was not a dishonest man. I had married him believing that. I wanted to keep believing it, but I am a JAG officer. I do not misread documents. I never mentioned it to Derek. I never told Donna. I requested a single quiet query through a federal contracting database I had legitimate access to, confirmed what I had seen, and then I made a choice. Lily was 5 years old. She had her father's jaw and my eyes and a laugh that started in her whole body and worked its way out. She loved dinosaurs that year, specifically the Ankylosaurus, which she informed me was the best dinosaur because it didn't have to be fast. It just had to be hard to hurt. I decided to be a woman who did not blow up her daughter's family over a contractor discrepancy that had, in the end, cost the federal government $43,000. I copied the relevant documents. I stored them in a secure location, and I buried it. Not forever. I was never naive enough to tell myself forever. I buried it with the specific intention of leaving it buried for as long as it was possible to leave it buried, and revisiting that decision only if circumstances had changed. The morning after Price's testimony, I drove to Donna's office before the sun was fully up. She was already there. She had the coffee made and the case files open, and the look of a woman who had been thinking all night. I put the second folder on her desk. She looked at it, then at me. "How long have you had this?" she said. 12 years, a long silence. "Wendy, I know. You've been sitting on federal fraud documentation for 12 years. I was protecting Lily." Donna looked at the folder. She didn't open it yet. She was doing what good lawyers do when they receive information that changes the shape of a case. She was mapping the implications before she touched the evidence. "This changes our position significantly," she said. "I know. This doesn't just affect custody. If this goes to the contracting authority—" "It won't," I said. "Not from us. Not unless he makes it necessary." I sat down across from her. "I don't want Derek in prison, Donna. I want him to stop. I want him to look at what I'm holding and understand that the game he's been playing, the one where I have nothing and he has everything, is over." Donna was quiet for a moment. "He's going to say you fabricated it," she said. "Or that you've been holding it as leverage for years." "Let him say it," I said. "The documents have chain of custody. The database query has a timestamp from 12 years ago, and I reached into the folder and laid a single page on the desk, a signed materials amendment from Derek's project manager at the time, countersigned by Derek himself, that confirms the revised quantities. In his own handwriting, Donna looked at the page. She picked it up, she read it, she set it down. "Okay," she said softly. "We arrived at the courthouse at 8:40. Derek and Marcus were already in the hallway in conversation, Marcus with his leather portfolio and his $400 an hour posture. Derek saw me come through the security doors. He looked different than he had the day before. Smaller somehow, though nothing physical had changed. The testimony from Price had done something to the architecture of his certainty, not collapsed it, but cracked it the way cold cracks concrete. Slowly, from inside, he watched me walk toward the courtroom door. I did not look at him. Inside, once we were seated and the clerk had stepped out, Donna leaned over to Marcus Webb and said quietly that she would like 5 minutes before proceedings began to share a document with opposing counsel that was relevant to the day's proceedings. Marcus looked at her, then at me. He took the document. He read it. The color left his face the way color leaves a room when the sun goes behind clouds. Gradually, then all at once, he stood and walked to Derek. He leaned down and spoke in Derek's ear. I was watching Derek's hands. They had been flat on the table again, the pressing down posture. Then they lifted. Then they went to his face. Cassandra, in the front row of the gallery, saw his face and stood up and walked out. Donna watched Cassandra leave. I watched Donna watch her. There was something in Donna's expression. Not surprise, exactly, but the specific alertness of a person whose peripheral vision has just confirmed something she had been tracking without fully naming. She picked up her phone under the table, typed something quickly, and put it back down. "What?" I said quietly. Later, she said, Judge Holt entered at 9:02. She called the proceeding to order, noted appearances for the record, and looked at Marcus Webb, who had returned to his seat with the expression of a man who had spent the last 4 minutes deciding which version of the next hour was least damaging to his client. "Mr. Webb," she said, "are you prepared to proceed?" "Your Honor," Marcus said. "I'd like to request a brief continuance to review materials shared by opposing counsel this morning before." "How brief?" A pause. 30 minutes. "Your Honor." Judge Holt looked at him over her glasses. 20. "We'll resume at 9:22. She stood, and everyone stood, and she walked back to her chambers with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had heard every delay tactic in the procedural handbook and was not impressed by any of them. The room exhaled. Derek was sitting very still. He had not looked at me since Marcus showed him the document. This was different from the earlier not looking, the morning of the meeting not looking, which had been strategic, deliberate, the performance of a man too confident to need acknowledgement. This was the not looking of a man who has realized that the room he believed he was standing in is not the room he is actually in. I knew that feeling. I had watched it happen to people across courtroom tables for 18 years. It never felt like victory. It felt like gravity, like something that was always going to be true, eventually becoming true now. Marcus Kitts came to our table during the recess. He sat down across from Donna without asking, which was either a sign of desperation or professionalism, and was probably both. The document, he said. Your client's position on how it enters the record. It's already entered, Donna said pleasantly, as part of the respondent's supplemental evidence package. It speaks to the opposing party's pattern of misrepresenting material facts, which is directly relevant to the court's assessment of credibility in custody determination. Marcus looked at her. You're not planning to refer this to federal contracting authorities. That's not a question I'm in a position to answer on my client's behalf at this time, Donna said, which was lawyer for, not if your client behaves himself. Marcus understood. He nodded once, stood, and went back to his table. At 9:22, Judge Holt returned. We resumed. Donna called our first witness, a former colleague of mine from my last JAG posting, who testified to my professional standing and the nature of my work. Clean, documented, straightforward. Marcus cross-examined briefly and without much energy. The document had done something to his momentum. A good lawyer is like a river. Powerful when the channel is clear, diminished when something shifts the terrain. Our second witness was Lily's current school counselor, Miss Henderson, the same counselor Marcus had added to his witness list to testify about my missed check-ins. Donna had gotten there first. Miss Henderson testified that in her 18 months working with Lily, the girl had consistently described her mother in terms that indicated a strong, communicative, emotionally present relationship, that Lily talked about her mother's work with evident pride, referred to their Sunday phone calls as a fixed and reliable point in her week, and had once told Miss Henderson, unprompted, that her mother was the person she wanted to be like when she grew up. Marcus had no useful cross-examination. It was during the lunch recess that Donna got the call. We were in a small conference room down the hall, eating sandwiches neither of us tasted, when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, held up one finger to me, and stepped into the hallway. She was gone for 9 minutes. When she came back, she sat down, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me with the expression she wore when something had broken open that she hadn't expected to break open quite this fast. You remember I texted someone during recess this morning, she said, when Cassandra left? Yes. She paused. I've had a loose concern for about 3 weeks. Nothing solid, just a pattern. 2 of our witnesses gave statements that were almost identically worded, in a way that suggested coordination. A third witness changed their account between the initial interview and their signed statement in a direction that happened to be very useful for Derek's case. She looked at her phone. I asked a colleague to pull Cassandra's phone records through our discovery request. We had standing to request them as part of the household communications review. We got them this morning. I waited. Cassandra contacted 3 of Derek's 7 witnesses directly, not through Marcus's office, personally. Her personal cell to theirs over a 6-week period beginning in September. Donna looked at me. One of them is a woman named Patricia Greer. She was going to testify that she saw you miss Lily's 8th grade orientation night because you were traveling for work, and that Lily seemed, quote, visibly distressed by your absence. I was in D.C. that night, I said. I called Lily from the hotel. We talked for 40 minutes, I know. I have the call log. Donna paused. What I also have now is a text message from Cassandra to Patricia Greer, sent 5 weeks ago, that reads, just say she seemed upset. Keep it simple. Derek will take care of the rest. The room was quiet. Outside in the hallway, I could hear the ordinary sounds of a courthouse at midday. Footsteps, a distant printer, 2 lawyers arguing pleasantly about a scheduling conflict. The world keeps moving anyway. That's witness tampering. I said. At minimum, Donna said. Potentially suborning perjury, depending on what Patricia Greer actually planned to say on the stand. She straightened the papers in front of her. I'm going to bring this to Judge Holt this afternoon. The afternoon session began at 1:30. At 2:15, Donna presented the communication records to Judge Holt with a formal motion citing witness interference. She was calm, precise, and thorough. She did not editorialize. She did not perform outrage. She laid the documents on the table, identified the relevant exchanges, and let the evidence speak. Marcus Webb objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Judge Holt studied the documents for a long time. The courtroom was very quiet. The particular quiet of a room in which everyone present understands that something is shifting that cannot be unshifted. Then she looked at Derek, not at Marcus, at Derek. Derek met her eyes for approximately 2 seconds. Then he looked down. Judge Holt removed her glasses. She set them on the bench in front of her. And then she said 5 words I will never forget, Mr. Foster. Explain this to me. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man gathering his thoughts. It was the silence of a man who had run out of them. Marcus Webb put his hand on Derek's arm. A gesture that looked like support but was actually restraint. The professional restraint of an attorney preventing his client from saying the wrong thing in the worst possible moment. Derek's mouth opened, closed. He looked, for the first time since I had known him, genuinely small, not diminished by me, not diminished by Price or Donna or the stack of documents on the evidence table, diminished by himself, by the choices he had made over months and years, arriving here all at once. It's the way choices always eventually do. Cassandra was not in the gallery. She had not come back after the morning recess. Marcus Webb asked for a recess. Judge Holt gave him 1 hour. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway and found a bench near the east-facing windows, the ones that looked out over a small courtyard with a live oak that had been there longer than the building. I sat down. I did not call anyone. I did not check my phone. I just sat and looked at the tree and let the hour be what it was. Donna came and sat beside me after a few minutes. She didn't say anything right away. That was one of the things I had always valued about Donna. She understood that silence between people who trust each other is not emptiness. It is a kind of holding. After a while she said, "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," I said. "That's not what I asked." I looked at the oak tree. A pigeon had landed on one of the upper branches and was conducting some private negotiation with the wind. "I'm tired," I said. "The good kind. The kind that means something is almost over." She nodded. "Lily's in school right now," I said. Second period would be finishing. She has lunch after that, and then AP English, and she'll spend most of AP English thinking about whatever book she's currently in the middle of and not finishing. I paused. I want this to be over so I can call her tonight and just talk about the book. Donna looked at me for a moment. "You're going to be okay," she said, not as comfort, as assessment. The way she said things she was certain of. "I know," I said. The hour passed. We went back in. What happened next, I did not plan. I want to be honest about that. I had not made calls. I had not coordinated anything during the recess. I had sat on a bench and looked at a tree and thought about my daughter's reading habits. What happened was that 3 men were sitting in the gallery when we returned. I noticed them because they were sitting together in the second row on the left, and because they had the posture, not Price's posture, not the senior officer's bearing, the decades of rank worn into the spine. These were younger men, 40s, maybe early 50s. The posture of people who had been trained to sit still in difficult environments and had not entirely lost the habit. I did not recognize them immediately. Then the one on the left looked up and caught my eye. Sergeant First Class David Okafor, 31 names. Kandahar, 2019. He had been the most junior of the accused, 23 years old at the time of the original charges, with a wife back in Georgia and a daughter born 4 months into the proceedings who he had not yet held. I had met her eventually, the daughter. Donna had sent me a photo. Dark eyes, wide smile, named Imani, which means faith. I stopped walking. Donna bumped into me from behind, Wendy. Okafor nodded once, the specific nod of a soldier acknowledging another soldier across a space where talking isn't possible. The man beside him I placed a moment later, Staff Sergeant Marcus Thibodeau, from Louisiana, who had made terrible coffee every morning in the JAG workspace and apologized for it every time with absolute sincerity, as though each cup were a fresh surprise. The third man I recognized by the scar on his left hand, Specialist Raymond Cho, who I had last seen in a hearing room in Stuttgart, shaking his head very slowly as I read the dismissal of charges into the record. I did not know how they had found out. I did not know who had called them, or whether Price had made contact, or whether the military community's particular grapevine, fast, specific, loyal, had simply done what it does. I sat down. Donna looked at the three men and then at me. Kandahar, she said quietly. 3 of them, I said. She was quiet for a moment. There are 4, she said. 1 more came in while you were in the hallway. He's in the back row. I didn't turn around. I would look later. For now, I needed to face forward. Judge Holt called the afternoon session to order at 3:47. Marcus Webb stood and, in the careful language of a lawyer managing damage on multiple fronts, informed the court that the opposing party was prepared to address the court's questions regarding the morning's communications evidence. What followed was not a confession. Lawyers don't confess. What it was an acknowledgement, structured, qualified, hedged at every edge, that certain communications had occurred between members of the opposing party's household and potential witnesses that had not been disclosed to counsel, and that counsel did not condone. It was the sound of Marcus Webb separating himself from Cassandra's choices while keeping Derek's options open. Judge Holt listened without expression. When Marcus finished, she looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I'd like to hear from the additional witnesses the respondent has listed." "Let's proceed," Donna stood. "Your Honor." The respondent calls David Okafor. Okafor stood from the gallery. He straightened his jacket. Civilian clothes, dark blue, the kind of careful dressing of a man who wanted to be taken seriously in a room he didn't know. He came forward, was sworn in, and sat in the witness chair with the stillness of someone accustomed to waiting. Donna walked him through the basics: name, service history, connection to the 2019 Kandahar proceedings. He answered in the plain, direct language of a man who has been trained to report accurately and has no patience for embellishment. Then she asked him one question. "In your experience of the proceedings in which Lieutenant Colonel Foster served as your legal advocate, how would you characterize her work on your behalf?" Okafor looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "She didn't have to fight that hard," he said. "That's what I want the court to understand. She could have done the minimum a lot of people would have. The case was complicated, the politics were bad, and the officer pushing the charges had more rank than she did and more connections than she did." He paused. "She fought like it was her own family in that room. All 31 of us, 4 months every day. She brought our boys home." The courtroom was still. Thibodeau testified next. He was less polished than Okafor, more emotional in the way of people who haven't had as much practice keeping it contained, and at one point he stopped mid-sentence and pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a few seconds before continuing. He talked about his daughter in Georgia. He talked about what it meant to watch the charges dismissed. He talked about writing a letter to Wendy Foster 6 months after the proceedings ended, and never knowing quite what to say, so he had kept writing drafts that he never sent. And maybe this was the letter. Cho testified briefly and precisely about the evidentiary work, the specific documents I had located and re-entered into the record that had formed the backbone of the defense. He spoke about it the way engineers speak about structures, with respect for the craft. The fourth witness, I turned when Donna called his name, was a man I hadn't expected, Master Sergeant William Pruitt, from North Carolina, who had been the senior non-commissioned officer in the group and had, in the first of the proceedings, been the most skeptical of me. He had been polite, cooperative, and fundamentally unconvinced that a female JAG officer with 6 years in was going to be able to do what needed doing. He sat in the witness chair and looked at me directly. "I was wrong about her," he said. "I want to put that on the record first, because it matters. I thought she was too young and I'll be honest, too quiet. I didn't think quiet meant what it turned out to mean." He folded his hands. Quiet with her meant she was keeping score. She had everything, every date, every discrepancy, every name. She didn't miss one thing in 4 months. He paused. "My granddaughter is 12 years old. When she asks me what kind of woman to be, I tell her, find someone like Lieutenant Colonel Foster. That kind." Derek had not moved for the last 40 minutes. He was looking at the table, not the pressing down posture anymore, just looking. Like a man reading something written a long time ago that he is only now understanding. And in the hallway outside the courtroom, through the small rectangular window in the door, I could see a shape I recognized. A girl, 14 years old, with her father's jaw and my eyes. Lily had not been told to come. She had come anyway. Judge Holt saw her too. I know because she paused, just slightly, just for a moment, when her eyes moved to the door window during Pruitt's testimony. She didn't comment. She didn't acknowledge it on the record, but she saw Lily standing in the hallway, and something in her expression shifted in the way that judges' expressions shift when the human truth of a case becomes visible outside the formal architecture of the proceeding. Court concluded at 5:17. Judge Holt did not issue her ruling from the bench that day. She informed both parties that she would take the evidence under advisement and issue a written ruling within 10 business days. She thanked the witnesses for their testimony, reminded counsel of outstanding filing deadlines, and adjourned. It was a measured, professional, close to a day that had been neither measured nor professional in its deeper movements. I gathered my files slowly. Around me the room emptied. Okafor and Thibodeau and Cho and Pruitt filed out together. Quietly, the way soldiers move when the job is done, and I would think about that later. The image of those 4 men walking through a courthouse in Austin, Texas on a November afternoon, showing up for someone who had shown up for them years ago in a place and in circumstances most people in that building would never be able to fully imagine. Marcus Webb left without speaking to me. Derek stood at his table for a long moment after Marcus left. His jacket was on the back of the chair. He was in his shirt sleeves and he looked, without the jacket and without the lawyer beside him, considerably less like the man who had walked into Donna's conference room 3 weeks ago, with a leather portfolio and a handshake like a statement. He looked tired. He looked like someone who had been running a long way and had finally stopped. "Wendy," he said. I looked at him. He stopped. "Start it again. I need to say something." "Okay," I said. Donna was behind me, giving us space, doing the small administrative tasks that good lawyers do when they are deliberately not listening. Derek looked at the table. Then at me. "I didn't know," he said, "about what Cassandra did. The witnesses. I didn't. I want you to know that I didn't ask her to do that." I looked at him steadily. "Okay," I said again. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just telling you I heard you." He was quiet for a moment. "The contract thing," he said. His voice was lower now. "You've had that for 12 years. Yes, and you never." "No." He looked at me for a long time. I watched him process what that meant. Not just the legal dimension of it. A woman who had possession of evidence of federal fraud and chose not to use it for 12 years. But the human dimension, the choice it represented. "The reason for it, Lily," he said quietly. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man receiving something he didn't entirely deserve and knew it. "I handled this wrong," he said. "It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't shaped like one. Didn't have the architecture of practiced contrition. It was just a sentence, plainly stated the way a tired person states a plain fact." "Yes," I said. "You did." He picked up his jacket from the chair. He folded it over his arm. He looked at me one more time. Not with warmth, not yet, maybe not ever, but with something I hadn't seen from him in years. Something that looked at its edges like respect. Then he walked out. Lily was in the hallway. I found her just outside the courtroom doors, sitting on the same bench where I had sat during the recess, looking at the live oak in the courtyard. She had her backpack on, one strap over her shoulder, a paperback sticking out of the front pocket, half finished, naturally. She looked up when I came through the door. For a moment neither of us said anything. She had her father's jaw and my eyes. Today, in the November light, the eyes were doing most of the work. "Mom," she said. "Hi, Bug," I said. She stood up and walked toward me and put her arms around me, and I held her the way you hold someone when you have been afraid of losing them and then discovered you haven't. Not dramatically, not collapsing into it, just fully in the way of something settling into its right place. We stood like that for a while. "I heard some of it," she said against my shoulder. "Through the door." "I know," I said. "The man, the general, Brigadier General Price, he said you brought 31 people home." 31 soldiers, I said. "Yes." She pulled back a little and looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Not accusation, genuine question. The question of a 14-year-old who is smart enough to understand that adults have reasons for things and is now old enough to want to know what they are. "I didn't want you to have to carry it," I said. "My work. The weight of it. I wanted you to just be a kid who had a mom who called on Sundays and drove 4 hours to see your concert." She looked at me. "I knew you drove 4 hours," she said. "I saw your car in the parking lot." I blinked. "You didn't say anything," I said. "Neither did you." She almost smiled, something very like my own expression. "We're kind of the same," I laughed. "It came up from somewhere I hadn't visited in a while." "Yeah," I said. "We kind of are. We drove home together." I had called her school to confirm she had a legitimate reason for the absence, which she did, because Donna had quietly handled that paperwork before the afternoon session. Lily sat in the passenger seat of the F-150 and looked out the window at the Austin traffic and didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Another thing we had in common, Judge Holt's ruling came 8 days later. Primary residential custody. The respondent, Wendy Foster. Structured visitation for the petitioner, Derek Foster, with a formal review in 12 months. A note in the ruling, unusual, not required, that the court found the respondent's character and professional history to be, quote, exceptionally well documented and clearly relevant to the assessment of parental fitness. Donna called me when the ruling came through. I was in the backyard of the Cedar Park rental, sitting on the porch that faced the dry creek bed, which wasn't dry anymore. "It's done," she said. "Okay," I said. "Wendy, you won." "I know," I said. "Thank you, Donna." For all of it, she was quiet for a moment. The 4 of them. Okafor, Thibodeau, Cho, Pruitt. "They've been texting me," she said. "They want to know if you'd consider having dinner." All of them together. "Just dinner?" I looked at the creek. "Yeah," I said. "Okay." 3 weeks later, Derek called. Not his lawyer. He called on a Sunday afternoon, which was Lily's call time with me, and I almost didn't pick up because the number surprised me. But I picked up. He didn't say much. He said he was sorry. Not the partial, hedged acknowledgement in the courtroom. The actual words, plainly, without qualification. He said he thought he had been telling himself a story about the marriage and about me that had been easier than the true one. And he had let that story become the way he treated his daughter's mother. And he was sorry for it. I listened, then I said, "I know you didn't ask Cassandra to do what she did." He was quiet. "Take care of yourself, Derek," I said. "Take care of Lily when she's with you. That's what matters now," he said he would. I believed him, not because I thought he was a good man without flaws, because I thought he was a flawed man who had just run out of reasons to keep being careless, and sometimes that is enough. A year changes things quietly. That's something I've learned to pay attention to. Not the dramatic shifts, the courtroom moments, the days when everything reorganizes itself around a single point. Those are real. But the quiet changes are the ones that last. The ones you only notice when you look back from a distance and realize the landscape is different from what it was. It's November again in Cedar Park. The live oak in the courthouse courtyard has lost its leaves and put them back and is in the process of deciding about the next round. The creek behind my house ran hard in the spring and slowed in the summer, and is now a thin, steady thread moving over smooth limestone, the way water moves when it has found its channel and has no argument left with the ground. Lily is 15. She finished a book last month. The whole thing. I know because she called me on a Tuesday, not Sunday, Tuesday, specifically to tell me how it ended. And the call lasted 47 minutes. And at some point, I was sitting on the porch in the dark without having noticed the sun go down, just listening to her talk about theme and character and what she thought the author had really meant by the ending, and thinking, this is it. This is the whole thing. This is what it was all for. She visits Derek on alternating weekends and every other holiday. It is not perfect. It is not warm, not yet. Maybe not ever in the way it once was or might have been. But it is functional, civil. He shows up on time. He asks about her schoolwork. He does not, as far as I can tell, speak badly about me in front of her. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, a great deal. Cassandra moved out of Derek's house in January. I don't know the details and I haven't asked. Lily mentioned it once, briefly, with the careful neutrality of a teenager who has learned to navigate adult complications. And I didn't press. Marcus Webb sent Donna a professional courtesy note after the ruling. She showed it to me mostly for the comedy of it. It said he looked forward to working with her in future proceedings. She wrote back equally pleasantly. That is how the law works, mostly. People who have been in opposition in one room end up in collaboration in another, and the whole system keeps moving. Okafor came to dinner. All four of them did in February, at a barbecue place in East Austin that Thibodeau had found and declared acceptable, on the grounds that the brisket smelled right from the parking lot. We sat for 3 hours. We talked about the case, some. We talked about other things more. Okafor's daughter Imani had turned 4 and had recently decided that her favorite animal was an ankylosaurus. And when I told him my daughter had gone through the same phase at the same age, he looked at me like I had said something mystical. And I told him it wasn't mystical. It was just that kids who are interested in things that don't have to be fast and just have to be hard to hurt tend to find each other across any distance. He wrote that down on a napkin. I don't know why. It seemed to matter to him. Raymond Price and I have had coffee twice. He is exactly the same as he was in uniform. Direct, economical with words, generous with the ones he chooses. He asked about Lily both times, which I appreciated. He is the kind of man who asks about the thing that actually matters instead of the thing that is easiest to ask about. I am still in Cedar Park. Still the 2-bedroom rental with the leaky faucet that I have now fixed myself with a YouTube tutorial and a specific amount of determination. Still the F-150. Still the job I took after leaving active duty, which is quiet and steady and lets me be home when I need to be home. I don't tell people what I do when they ask. Still. Old habit, but when Lily's friends come over now and one of them asks, Lily answers before I can. She says, very simply, my mom's a lieutenant colonel, JAG Corps. She got 31 soldiers out of a bad situation in Afghanistan, and she's basically the person you call when the system gets it wrong. She says it like it's a simple fact. Which I suppose it is. There is a thing I want to say to you directly, because older Americans understand this, and because some of you listening tonight may be carrying something similar. A truth about yourself that you have kept quiet. Not out of shame, but out of the particular kind of care that doesn't announce itself, the kind that protects the people around you at the cost of letting them believe something smaller about you than is real. I am not going to tell you to stop being that person. That person is often exactly who is needed. The world runs, more than anyone admits, on people who are content to do the work without the recognition, who keep the accounts without displaying them, who hold the line in rooms that will never be written about. But I will say this. There are moments when the file needs to go on the table, not to win, not to prove something, not to make the person who underestimated you feel the specific discomfort of being wrong, but because the truth, held privately, only protects others up to a point. After that point, it protects no one. After that point, the only thing keeping it in your pocket is habit, and the faint residue of a time when hiding it was the right call. Know the difference. That's all. Now, ledger. My colleagues gave me that call sign in 2007, during my second deployment, after a case in which I located a single discrepancy in a financial accounting document that unraveled 3 months of fraudulent supply chain reporting and cleared a procurement officer who had been one signature away from a court-martial he didn't deserve. I asked them afterward why Ledger Thibodeau. It was Thibodeau. Of course it was Thibodeau, said, because a ledger doesn't judge, it doesn't argue, it doesn't raise its voice, it just keeps every entry accurate, in order, until someone needs to know the truth. I didn't say anything at the time. I've thought about it many times since. A ledger doesn't decide what's true. It just refuses to let anything be lost. That's what I was trying to do for 18 years. In courtrooms in Iraq and Stuttgart and Bagram and Kandahar, and a family court in Austin, Texas, on a November afternoon with my daughter watching through a small window in a door. Keep the entries. Keep them accurate. Wait for the moment when someone needs to know. The moment always comes. If this story meant something to you tonight, if you're carrying something that deserves to be known, or if you love someone who has been quiet in the way that costs them, share it with them. Not because they need the reminder, just because sometimes it helps to know that someone else understands why they've been so still for so long, and that the ledger, when it finally opens, changes everything.